Hey everyone, welcome back to the special federal election series on the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayotte. And as you know, if you've been following the series, I'm speaking to a number of experts to get different perspectives on Canadian national defense. And I'm lucky today to have Dr. Adam Chapnick from the Canadian Forces College here to talk about defense policy. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. And just want to say quickly, Chris, before we start, that I speak here for myself and my views don't necessarily reflect the views of the Department of National Defense.
So why don't we start, for those who have not gone through the college and don't know you, maybe giving everybody a bit of background on who you are and perhaps how that relates to the area of defense policy.
Sure. I'm trained in history and international affairs, PhD in history from University of Toronto. I've been teaching at the CFC for 18 years. I teach a course to all of the national security program in how the Canadian government makes and doesn't make decisions. And the course is based around the question, how come my great idea never becomes policy and that lesser idea does? I also teach a course to the Joint Command and Staff program, the majors and the lieutenant commanders, on the history of Canadian foreign policy up until yesterday.
Yeah, I think we all want to know why our great ideas didn't get picked by the commander or the decision maker. Now, before we started, I said that I'm going to impose a maybe an unrealistic assumption just to drive the conversation here. But let's just assume that defense takes on some sort of an increased level of prominence in this next government, and whether that be with increased defense investment or however we want to frame it. And I want to use that assumption to get after how we maybe have to do defense policy a little bit differently, or maybe how we could or should do it a little bit differently. But maybe let's start then with the historic view on how Canada approaches defense policy and focus over the last number of decades.
Well, I would characterize it in defense, and I'll put the security in there as well, just to broaden it a little bit, as fits and spurts. That so we go into the First World War entirely unprepared, and then realize we need to be prepared and commit wholeheartedly and completely to a total war effort. We can't wait to stop doing defense the moment the war ends, and therefore we go into the Second World War entirely unprepared, realize that it's important, and then commit wholeheartedly to making a contribution for our national interests and for the national interests of the Empire in the West. And then again, we can't wait to disarm. We don't get to disarm for as long because the Korean War comes 5 years later, and all of a sudden we have to commit, again, not quite as wholeheartedly, but the ramp up in terms of defense spending from $800 million to $2 billion in a matter of 3 or 4 years, if you look at it in percentage terms, is absolutely overwhelming. Defense continues to be the greatest expenditure in Canadian budget up through to the early 1960s. By the 1960s, social spending begins to take on greater importance, especially with the perceived perceptions of détente in the Cold War. Under Trudeau the Elder, first we ramp down, and then the Cold War heats up and we start to ramp up. Under Mulroney, we begin by ramping up, and then the Cold War ends and we take the peace dividend quite happily. We continue to take it under Mr. Chrétien. Under Mr. Martin, we begin to take defense more seriously, and then he's gone. Mr. Harper begins to take defense more seriously, and after he decides that Afghanistan is not winnable, he takes national security more seriously, but stops paying for defense or security. Current Trudeau, the just ended Trudeau government came in with a blank page on defense, reviewed defense, went across the country, decided that they should spend more money on it, and had trouble spending the money that they decided to spend. And that leaves us in a position today where we'd gotten away without spending or taking it particularly seriously because we could rely on the Americans, but all of a sudden the Americans seem a little bit less reliable, and as a result, we're having some big conversations about what we should do about defense and security.
Now, do you think that the new U.S. administration and all of the uncertainty that we're dealing with south of the border, how they're now potentially viewing, because I think nobody really knows, based on today it's fine, tomorrow it's not. Do you think that this level of uncertainty and chaos is going to drive Canada in a different direction in how we approach national security and defense policy?
I think that we're certainly going to have to talk about things more seriously. As you mentioned, the administration changes its mind almost daily in the United States, and defense decisions take years to implement. So it's hard to know exactly how we're going to turn or what we're going to do. But we're certainly, for the public to have a conversation about whether we should purchase all of the F-35s that we plan to purchase, or whether we should just purchase some of them and purchase Swedish Gripens instead. That's not a conversation that the public in this country has had since the Second World War, if ever. So there is a greater desire for some literacy in defense and security matters among the public that is highly unusual over the course of our recent, if not fairly lengthy history.
Now, what would you say? Like, what are some of the indicators that you'd flag and say, okay, that looks like we're taking things more seriously now?
On the security side, and defense is implicated because it's part of the greater security family, by the end of the second Trudeau era, we actually had in place finally a structure for government decision-making around security that was reasonably mature. I mean, Stephen Harper, to be fair, had a structure that worked, but it was simply he consulted with his national security advisor, Stephen Rigby, who he trusted, and that was the process. Trudeau government, by the time they left, we had a cabinet committee on national security, chaired by the Prime Minister, attended not only by the ministers responsible for the major security files, including, of course, the Minister of National Defense, but also attended by the senior public servants responsible to those ministers. So there was no disconnect between what was being discussed at the cabinet table and what went back to the public service. So that was step one. Step two was that these conversations were more like university seminars than they were cabinet meetings, in that every 6 to 8 weeks a theme was brought up. The public service produced background briefing notes on that theme, and the ministers got educated on that theme so that we would have a more literate cabinet in discussions of security, and that literacy moved beyond just the Minister of National Defense and maybe the Minister of Public Safety and Global Affairs. So there was a desire to increase the level of literacy. The National Security Advisor got a published mandate letter, which meant that she was publicly accountable for certain actions, and made clear for the first time in a long time how the national security structure in the public service was supposed to work, what exactly the National Security and Intelligence Advisor's job was going to be, who reported to whom, and how things were going to shape out. So we had, when Prime Minister Trudeau left, the machinery we needed to be grown-ups about national security. And that would, of course, include defense. We didn't really test it much because, the cabinet process was only in place for about 6 months. But the process was there. The current Prime Minister, Mr. Carney, has merged the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations with the Cabinet Committee on National Security, but he's still chairing it, so we haven't lost everything. And depending on who becomes the next Prime Minister and whether they publish these things, we'll know if that more mature structure remains at least somewhat in place. The idea that the Prime Minister now chairs a Cabinet Committee that discusses these issues automatically brings security and defense to the center in a way that it wasn't necessarily when there was a separate cabinet committee not chaired by the Prime Minister in charge of these things.
Now, is there any sort of historical, whether it be trends or precedents so let's say that the Conservative Party forms government. Does that machinery typically stay in place? Do they take 6 months to just sort of figure out how to find the House of Commons? Like, what is the lag time, or what are some of the implications of having a new government when it comes to policy formation?
So the way that it works in Canada is that the Prime Minister gets the structure that they want. So the Prime Minister, if we get a new Conservative Prime Minister, they will be briefed by the Privy Council office on the structures in place. It will be explained to them that you need to set up a cabinet committee structure. They'll have access to the way previous cabinet committees had been structured, and they'll make a decision. Usually, always you will have somebody in charge of your transition team. And typically, whoever's in charge of your transition team will have intimate experience at the center of government. So they will also bring experience and ideas to the table as to how cabinet might best be structured for these decision-making processes to take place. So if a new conservative government wants to borrow from there, they can. Mr. Harper also had a cabinet committee on national security that he chaired for 2 years. It just didn't work for him. He didn't like it. The PMO, the Prime Minister's office, didn't like it, and he disbanded it almost as quickly as he set it up. So there's a conservative precedent you could work with if you didn't want to work with a liberal precedent. And your transition team will work with the Prime Minister to sort out how they want to organize things.
Okay. And do we have any sense of what the lag time is from a new government forming to actually be starting to be efficient in the production of policy, the implementation of policy in Canada?
So the ability of the government to hit the ground running will depend on a couple of things. Number one will be the amount of experience they have governing. So a liberal government coming in can probably get up to speed faster because they've been in power for 9 years than a conservative government, particularly a conservative government that doesn't have that many senior ministers from a decade ago. So that would take time. When you're new, your ability to ramp up quickly depends on your humility. A humble, mature new government will recognize that for the first 3 to 6 months that they govern, the public service will know more than them about just about everything. And even to the extent of about the realism of their platform, because the public service during the election is working on transitions for any possible winner, and they're taking the policy promises that are made by the leading political parties, and they're wargaming how those might be put into practice so that they can offer recommendations to the government, particularly on the most timely promises. So if you've got the humility to accept that you don't have the expertise, you can actually move quickly. If you believe that you know everything, the public service knows nothing, you're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes, and it's going to take you a very long time to get going.
The last question I've been posing to everybody, Adam, is about, advice to the Prime Minister. So if you happen to bump into whoever the new PM is, he comes to visit CFC, you bump into him at the grocery store in Toronto, whatever. He says, "Hey, Adam, great to see you." And you say, "Prime Minister, I've got a couple of questions or a couple pieces of advice for you." What would you tell him in terms of defense policy, security policy? So, these are the things I really think you should do now to set the conditions for success in the future.
I would never impose on a prime minister unless they asked me directly. But if somehow I was doing that, my number one ask would be, don't promise anything to the public that you can't actually fulfill. If we want to have a serious conversation, we have to discuss things seriously, which means that ambition has to be tempered by reality. I would much prefer that you underpromise and overdeliver, and I would much prefer that you warn us that things aren't going to be easy, and that there is a cost to defense and security that we're all going to have to bear. Leveling with the public will make the pain of investment go down easier.
Dr. Adam Chapnick, thank you so much for joining me on this special edition of the Northern Sentinels podcast as we march towards our federal election at the end of the month.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.